Ethan's life had always been quiet. A gentle kind of quiet, like the whisper of wind through the trees on a still autumn night, punctuated only by the occasional creak of floorboards in his modest house or the hum of his computer. At 27, he had carved out a life of solitude, not by choice but by circumstance. His parents had passed when he was young, and though he had friends, he'd never felt the deep connection to anyone that made him crave companionship. It was easier to be alone, or so he'd convinced himself. His days were predictable: wake up, make coffee, work as a freelance graphic designer from the small nook he'd turned into a home office, take a walk around the neighborhood in the evening, then fall into the familiar embrace of a book or a film before bed. There was comfort in the routine. The house next door had been vacant for nearly a year, and its emptiness had become part of his landscape, just another thing that faded into the background of his life. That is, until the day she moved in. It started like any other. Ethan was returning from his daily walk, the early evening sky streaked with hues of orange and pink, the air crisp with the onset of fall. As he rounded the corner toward his street, he noticed something unusual: a large moving truck parked outside the house next door. His eyebrows rose in mild surprise. It wasn't often that new people moved into their quiet little neighborhood. He was used to things staying the same, stable, unchanging. But then he saw her. At first, she was just a silhouette, backlit by the setting sun, as she stood by the truck, instructing the movers where to place her belongings. Ethan's steps slowed, his breath catching in his throat as his gaze sharpened. There was something otherworldly about her. As he drew closer, details began to emerge. Her skin wasn't like anything he'd ever seen. A soft, radiant lavender that seemed to shimmer faintly in the fading daylight. Her hair, if it could be called hair, was silver, but not the dull silver of age. It was lustrous, almost like liquid metal, cascading down her back in smooth, flowing waves. She moved with a grace that was unnerving, her every motion fluid, as though she wasn't bound by the same gravity that weighed the rest of them down. Ethan felt an inexplicable pull toward her. He had always been a rational man, grounded in logic, but in that moment, something inside him stirred a curiosity he hadn't felt in years. He paused near the edge of the yard, watching as she gracefully thanked the movers, her voice soft but melodic, like the ringing of a far-off bell. It wasn't until one of the movers glanced over and caught Ethan staring that he realized how long he had been standing there. Heat rushed to his face in embarrassment, and he quickly diverted his gaze, pretending to check his phone, though his fingers fumbled clumsily over the screen. He began to walk again, faster this time, hoping to slip past unnoticed. "Hello." The voice was like velvet, impossibly soft but clear. It stopped Ethan in his tracks, a shiver running down his spine. He turned slowly, and there she was, standing at the edge of her yard, her vivid lavender skin glowing faintly in the fading sunlight. Her eyes were the most striking thing about her. They were large, almond-shaped, and a deep, iridescent shade of violet, swirling with shades that seemed to shift and change depending on how the light hit them. They locked onto his, and for a moment he forgot how to speak. He stammered, unsure of what to say. His heart pounded in his chest, a strange sensation for someone who was usually so composed. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to stare. It's okay," she interrupted, her lips curling into a gentle smile. "I understand. I'm different." Her voice was calm, but there was an underlying sadness in her tone, something Ethan couldn't quite place. She glanced down, as if suddenly unsure of herself, her fingers brushing a strand of silver hair behind her ear. Different. That was an understatement, Ethan thought, but he kept the observation to himself. "I'm Ethan," he said, forcing himself to speak more clearly. "I live next door." The woman, if that's what she was, tilted her head slightly, as though considering him. "Ethan," she repeated, her accent lilting, unfamiliar. "I'm Ilara." "Ilara," he echoed, the name rolling off his tongue like a melody. It suited her. There was a pause, a moment of silence between them, but it wasn't uncomfortable. In fact, Ethan found himself strangely at ease, despite the strangeness of the situation. There was something calming about her presence, something that felt right. "Well, welcome to the neighborhood," Ethan said awkwardly, scratching the back of his neck. "If you need anything, feel free to ask. I've lived here for a while, so I can help you get settled." Ilara's eyes softened, her smile widening just a fraction. "Thank you, Ethan. That's very kind of you." He nodded, feeling his pulse quicken again under her gaze. Her kindness seemed so genuine, her eyes so full of warmth, despite the fact that she was clearly not from this world. Ethan wasn't sure what he expected from an alien if that's what she was, but it wasn't this. He had always imagined beings from other planets would be cold, logical, perhaps even emotionless. But Ilara, she was kind, soft-spoken, almost vulnerable. The strangeness of the moment hit him like a wave, and he realized he didn't want to leave. But he also didn't know what to say next, so he offered a small wave and awkwardly added, "Good luck with the move." "Thank you," Ilara replied, her voice carrying a faint wistfulness. She watched him for a moment longer, then turned back toward her house, her silver hair catching the last rays of the setting sun. As Ethan walked the few steps back to his own home, his mind buzzed with questions. Who or what was Ilara? Where had she come from? How was it possible that someone so different had ended up living next door to him? He tried to push the thoughts away, telling himself that it was none of his business. She was just a neighbor, and there was no reason to pry into her life. People moved all the time, perhaps she had her reasons for being here. But as he unlocked his front door and stepped into the familiar quiet of his home, he couldn't shake the feeling that his world had just shifted on its axis. For the rest of the evening, Ethan couldn't focus on his usual distractions. The book he had been reading felt dull, the film he had queued up played on in the background, ignored. His thoughts kept drifting back to Ilara, her luminous skin, her otherworldly eyes, the way her voice had sounded so soft, yet carried the weight of something ancient and unspoken. Sleep came fitfully that night, his dreams filled with strange visions of distant planets, shimmering stars, and Ilara standing at the edge of his yard, her violet eyes watching him with an intensity that made his heart race. When he woke the next morning, Ethan lay in bed for a long time, staring at the ceiling, trying to make sense of the strange new reality that had taken root in his life. For years he had lived quietly, content in his isolation, believing that the world outside his door was small and predictable. But now the universe felt impossibly vast. And it was all because of the mysterious woman who had moved in next door. As the days went on, Ethan found himself looking out of his window more often than he would care to admit. He wasn't sure what he was hoping to see, perhaps a glimpse of Ilara, or maybe some sign that she wasn't as alone as she seemed. But the house next door remained as quiet as ever, its windows dark, its new inhabitant shrouded in mystery. He told himself it was foolish to obsess over her. After all, they had only spoken once, and it had been a brief, polite exchange. But there was something about her that lingered in his mind, like the fading echo of a song he couldn't quite forget. Something about Ilara felt important. And deep down, Ethan knew that his quiet, predictable life was about to change forever. Ethan stood at the window, a cup of coffee in hand, his gaze once again drawn to the house next door. It had been nearly a week since his brief, mesmerizing encounter with Ilara, and though they hadn't spoken since, she never seemed far from his thoughts. Her presence, or perhaps the mystery of her, had woven itself into the fabric of his routine. Every morning, every evening he found himself glancing toward her house, half expecting to see her step outside, radiant under the sunlight or bathed in moonlight. But her house remained still, as though it had absorbed the same silence that filled Ethan's own life. The lights inside flickered on and off at odd hours, but beyond that, there was little sign of movement. It was almost as though she was a phantom, an apparition who had briefly touched his life and then vanished, leaving only questions in her wake. He took a sip of coffee, savoring the bitter warmth, and tried to push her from his mind. There were deadlines to meet, clients waiting for their projects. But his work felt tedious today, the designs lifeless under his hands. His mind kept drifting back to her soft, melodic voice, her strange yet captivating appearance, the way her eyes had seemed to look straight through him, as though seeing something far deeper than anyone else ever had. Just as he was about to retreat into his work, a flash of movement caught his attention. There she was, standing in her front yard, her silver hair rippling slightly in the breeze. But something was different today. Her usual calm, graceful demeanor was replaced by an aura of distress. Her body language seemed tense, her shoulders hunched as she stared down at the ground, her lavender hands clutching something small and metallic. Without thinking, Ethan set down his coffee, grabbed his jacket, and headed outside. His heart raced as he crossed the yard toward her, driven by an inexplicable need to check on her, to make sure she was all right. He wasn't sure what he expected to do or say after all, She was an alien, someone from another world entirely. What help could he possibly offer? But something about her vulnerability called to him, and he couldn't ignore it. As he approached, he could see her more clearly. Her usual ethereal glow seemed dimmed, her violet eyes focused intently on the object in her hands. It was a small, spherical device, alien in design, with intricate carvings that shimmered faintly in the light. Her fingers moved over it with an anxious energy, twisting it, pressing unseen buttons, as though she were trying to fix it. Ethan cleared his throat softly, trying not to startle her. "Ilara." She looked up sharply, her eyes widening in surprise. For a moment she looked almost panicked, as though caught doing something she wasn't supposed to. But when she recognized him, the tension in her shoulders eased, though her expression remained guarded. "Ethan," she said, her voice softer than he remembered, as if weighed down by whatever was troubling her. "I didn't hear you approach." He smiled awkwardly, rubbing the back of his neck. "Sorry, I didn't mean to sneak up on you. I saw you out here and thought I'd say hello. Are you all right? You seem upset." Her eyes flickered toward the device in her hands, and for a brief moment Ethan thought she might brush off his concern, retreating behind the polite distance that had marked their first encounter. But then she sighed, her shoulders sagging slightly, as though the weight of whatever burden she carried had become too heavy to bear alone. "I'm fine," she said, though her tone lacked conviction. She hesitated, then added, "Or at least I will be." Ethan took a step closer, his curiosity piqued. "Is it something I can help with?" Ilara glanced up at him, her eyes searching his face, as if weighing whether or not to let him in. There was a vulnerability in her gaze that he hadn't seen before, a flicker of uncertainty that seemed so out of place on someone who had moved with such quiet confidence. Finally she sighed again and held up the small device. "It's malfunctioning," she said, her voice tinged with frustration. "This is a piece of communication technology from my home. It allows me to stay connected with my people, to send and receive messages across great distances, but lately it's been unreliable." Ethan stared at the device, a mixture of awe and concern swirling in his chest. He had guessed that she wasn't from around here, her appearance had made that clear enough, but hearing her speak so casually about communicating with another world was still a shock. It was one thing to imagine someone as an alien, it was another to be confronted with the tangible proof of it. He reached out cautiously, as if afraid to touch something so otherworldly. "Do you think it's broken?" She shook her head, her silver hair catching the light like strands of spun moonlight. "No, not broken. Just disrupted. There are certain frequencies here on Earth that interfere with its signal, and I'm still trying to figure out how to adjust it. Without it, I feel disconnected, isolated." The word hit Ethan like a punch to the gut. Isolated. He understood that feeling all too well. "I'm sorry," he said quietly, his voice laced with empathy. "It must be hard being so far from home." Ilara's eyes softened, her guarded expression melting away for a moment. She lowered the device and looked at him with a kind of raw honesty that made his chest tighten. "It is. Harder than I expected." There was a silence between them, but it wasn't the awkward, uncomfortable kind that Ethan usually dreaded. Instead, it was a shared silence, a mutual understanding that didn't need words. Ethan realized in that moment just how alike they were, despite their differences. They were both alone in a world that didn't quite fit them. Without thinking, he blurted out, "Do you need a ride somewhere? If you need supplies or something for the device, I could help. I've got a car." Ilara blinked, clearly taken aback by the offer. "A ride?" Ethan laughed nervously. "Yeah, it's this human thing. Cars. We use them to get around. I could take you to the store, or, I don't know, wherever you need to go." For a moment she just stared at him, and Ethan was sure he'd made a fool of himself. Offering to drive an alien to the store, what was he thinking? But then Ilara did something unexpected. She smiled. It wasn't the polite, distant smile she'd given him before. This one was warm, genuine, and it lit up her face in a way that made Ethan's heart skip a beat. There was something so disarming about that smile, something that made her seem less like an alien and more like someone who needed a friend. "I would like that," she said softly. "Thank you, Ethan. That's very kind of you." For a moment he just stood there, stunned by the fact that she had accepted his offer. Then he shook himself out of it and nodded quickly. Great. Let me just grab my keys. As he hurried back to his house, his heart raced in a way it hadn't in years. He wasn't sure what he was feeling: nervousness, excitement, maybe even a little fear. But whatever it was new, and it made him feel alive in a way he hadn't in a long time. Minutes later, they were driving through the quiet streets of their neighborhood, the hum of the engine filling the silence between them. Ethan's old car wasn't much to look at, just a beat-up sedan that had seen better days, but Ilara didn't seem to mind. She stared out the window, her eyes wide with curiosity as she took in the scenery. To her, even the mundane sights of Earth must have seemed strange and new. "Is this your first time on Earth?" Ethan asked, glancing over at her. Ilara hesitated, then nodded. "Yes, I came here as part of a diplomatic mission, I suppose you could call it, but I decided to stay for a while longer. I wanted to learn more about your world, about humans. There is much I don't understand." Ethan raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "A diplomatic mission? So are you like an ambassador or something?" She laughed softly, the sound like music. "Not exactly. I'm more of an observer. My people, those from my planet, Cyberpunk, believe in understanding before we interact with other civilizations. We've watched Earth for a long time, but we rarely make direct contact. We prefer to blend in, to live among humans quietly." "Blend in?" Ethan echoed, his voice incredulous. He shot her a teasing look. "No offense, Ilara, but you don't exactly blend in, you kind of stand out." She smiled again, a hint of amusement in her eyes. "Yes, I suppose I do. But here, in this small town, it's easier to keep a low profile. People are curious, but they don't ask too many questions." Ethan nodded thoughtfully, his mind swirling with questions of his own. He wanted to know more about her world, about how she had come to Earth, about what her life was like before she moved in next door. But he didn't want to overwhelm her, not when she had already opened up more than he'd expected. Instead, he focused on the road ahead, guiding the car toward the small electronics store at the edge of town. It was a modest place, but it had what she might need, or at least Ethan hoped so. He had no idea what kind of supplies an alien communication device required. As they pulled into the parking lot, Ilara turned to him, her violet eyes shining with gratitude. "Thank you, Ethan. I didn't expect any of this." He smiled, feeling a warmth spread through his chest. "It's no problem, really. I'm just glad I can help." They stepped out of the car, and as they walked toward the store, Ethan realized something surprising: the awkwardness he had felt around her was fading. In its place was a growing sense of ease, of connection. It wasn't just that she was different, it was that she understood him in a way no one else had. They were both outsiders in their own way, and in that shared sense of isolation, they had found a strange, unexpected bond. As they entered the store, Ethan caught a glimpse of Ilara's reflection in the glass door, her lavender skin and silver hair casting an ethereal glow in the fluorescent lights. He couldn't help but wonder what other secrets she held, what other stories she had to tell. But for now he was content to take things one step at a time. There was no need to rush after all. He had all the time in the world to get to know the mysterious woman who had moved in next door. The warmth of the early autumn sun streamed through the window as Ethan and Ilara sat side by side in his small living room, the gentle hum of the alien device filling the space between them. It had been 2 weeks since their trip to the electronics store, and in that time their relationship had evolved from polite neighbors to something far deeper. Every day they found themselves spending more time together, whether it was sharing meals, exploring the town, or simply talking about their respective worlds. Today, though, was different. Today Ilara had invited Ethan into her world not with words, but with technology unlike anything he had ever seen. On the coffee table in front of them sat the small, spherical communication device, the one Ilara had been struggling with when Ethan first approached her. But now it was no longer malfunctioning. She had fixed it, and in doing so, had unlocked something extraordinary. As the device hummed softly, it projected a series of holographic images into the air, floating, translucent scenes from Ilara's home planet, Cyberpunk. Ethan sat back, his eyes wide with wonder as he took in the alien landscapes that hovered before him. It was like nothing he had ever imagined: an ethereal world bathed in soft, violet light, with skies that shimmered with hues of pink and gold. Towering trees with crystalline leaves swayed gently in the breeze, their branches stretching toward the sky like reaching hands. Rivers of light flowed through the landscape, their waters glowing softly as they meandered through lush, alien forests. There were floating cities too massive, sleek structures that seemed to defy gravity, suspended high in the air by some unseen force. The buildings themselves were elegant, organic in design, with sweeping curves and arches that gave them the appearance of being grown rather than built. But it wasn't just the beauty of the images that captivated Ethan. It was the way Ilara looked at them, the way her violet eyes softened with a quiet, almost melancholic reverence as she watched the memories of her home come to life. He could see how much Cyrenara meant to her, how deeply it was ingrained in her soul, and for the first time he truly understood just how far from home she was. "It's beautiful," Ethan whispered, his voice filled with awe. Ilara nodded, her gaze still fixed on the holograms. "It is," she said softly. "Cyrenara is, or was, a place of peace, harmony. Our people value balance between nature and technology, between the mind and the heart. We strive to live in harmony with our world, to never take more than we give." Her words were filled with a quiet pride, but there was something else there too, an undercurrent of sadness that Ethan couldn't ignore. He turned to her, his brow furrowing in concern. "You said was what happened." Ilara hesitated, her hands resting in her lap, her fingers tracing the edges of the device. For a long moment she said nothing, her eyes distant as though she were seeing something far beyond the images in front of them. Finally she sighed, her voice barely above a whisper. "Cyrenara is changing," she said. "Our way of life. It's being threatened by forces we didn't anticipate. Outside influences, greed, corruption, things we thought we had left behind long ago. My people are at a crossroads, and many fear that the balance we have worked so hard to maintain is slipping away." Ethan felt a pang of empathy as he listened to her speak. He could see how much it hurt her to admit that her world, the place she so clearly loved, was in turmoil. It wasn't unlike the struggles humanity faced, though their problems were different. The core issues were the same: power, greed, the delicate balance between progress and preservation. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "I can't imagine how hard it must be to watch that happen. To be so far away from home while things are changing." Ilara turned to him, her eyes shimmering with gratitude. "Thank you, Ethan. It is hard. Harder than I thought it would be. But I came here for a reason. I wanted to understand humans, to see if your world had the same challenges, the same potential for harmony or destruction." She paused, her gaze searching his face, as though trying to gauge his reaction. "And what have you learned so far?" he asked, his voice gentle. Ilara smiled faintly, a touch of sadness still lingering in her eyes. "I've learned that humans are capable of incredible beauty and kindness," she said. "But you are also capable of great destruction. Your history is filled with wars, conflicts, the exploitation of your planet's resources. And yet, you also create art, music, love. You fight for what you believe in. You have the potential for balance, just like my people. But it is a fragile thing." Ethan nodded slowly, feeling the weight of her words. "Yeah, we're complicated," he admitted. "It's not always easy to do the right thing. There's so much noise, so many competing interests. Sometimes it feels like we're just stumbling through life, trying to figure out who we are and what we're supposed to be." Ilara's expression softened, and for a moment they simply sat there in silence, the holographic images of Cyrenara flickering gently in the air between them. Ethan felt a strange connection in that moment, a deep sense of understanding that went beyond words. Despite their differences, despite the fact that she was from another world entirely, they shared a common struggle: the search for balance, for meaning, for a place to belong. As the silence stretched on, Ethan's thoughts began to shift, focusing not on the grand philosophical questions they had been discussing, but on Ilara herself. He found himself drawn to her in a way that went beyond mere curiosity. There was something about her, something in the way she carried herself, in the way she looked at the world, that captivated him. She was intelligent, thoughtful, and kind, but there was also a vulnerability to her, a sense that she was just as lost as he was, searching for answers in a world that didn't always make sense. And then there was her beauty. Ethan had never been one to dwell on appearances, but Ilara's was impossible to ignore. Her lavender skin, her silver hair, the way her eyes seemed to hold entire galaxies within them, it was all so alien, so different, and yet it was mesmerizing. Every time he looked at her, he felt a pull, a quiet ache in his chest that he couldn't quite explain. He wanted to reach out to her, to tell her how he felt, but he hesitated. She was from another world, another culture. What if she didn't see him the same way? What if her people didn't even have relationships the way humans did? But as he glanced over at her, he caught her looking at him, her violet eyes filled with an intensity that took his breath away. For a moment, they simply stared at each other, the air between them thick with unspoken tension. Ethan's heart raced, and he could feel the weight of his emotions building, pressing against his chest like a tidal wave. And then, without thinking, he spoke. "Ilera. She blinked, her eyes widening slightly as if she could sense what he was about to say. Ethan swallowed, his throat dry, but he couldn't stop himself. The words tumbled out, raw and unfiltered. "I think I'm falling for you." There it was, laid bare in the open, the confession hanging between them like a fragile thread. For a moment the room seemed to hold its breath, the hum of the alien device the only sound breaking the silence. Ilera stared at him, her eyes searching his face, and Ethan felt his heart hammering in his chest. He half expected her to pull away, to tell him that his feelings were misplaced, that they were from different worlds, and that such emotions were impossible between them. But she didn't. Instead, she reached out, her hand trembling slightly as she placed it gently on his. Her skin was cool to the touch, and yet it sent a warmth through him that spread from his fingertips to his chest, filling him with a sense of calm and peace. As she began, her voice soft, hesitant, "Ethan, I don't know what to say." He opened his mouth to apologize, to tell her that he hadn't meant to put her on the spot, but she continued before he could speak. "I've never felt this way before. Not about a human, not about anyone." Ethan's breath caught in his throat, his eyes locking onto hers. There was a vulnerability in her expression, a fear that mirrored his own. It wasn't just about their differences, it was about the risk of letting someone in, of exposing their hearts to the possibility of pain. "Ilera," he said softly, his hand turning over to hold hers more firmly. "You don't have to say anything right now. I wanted you to know, I've never met anyone like you. And I don't mean just because you're from another planet. I mean, you're kind, you're brilliant, you see the world in a way that's so different. I've been alone for a long time. But since I met you, things feel different, better." Ilera's eyes glistened with unshed tears, and for a moment, Ethan feared he had said too much, that he had scared her away. But then she leaned in, her voice barely above a whisper. "Ethan, I feel it too," she admitted, her words trembling on the air. "But I'm scared. I'm scared of what this means, of what it could cost us. I don't know how my people would react if they found out. I don't even know how your people would react." He reached up, gently brushing a strand of her silver hair away from her face. "I don't care about what other people think. All I care about is what you feel. What we feel." She looked at him, her eyes filled with a mixture of fear and hope. And then, slowly, she leaned in closer, her face inches from his. Ethan's heart pounded in his chest, his breath shallow as he realized what was happening. And then, before he could think, before he could second-guess himself, he closed the gap between them. Their lips met in a soft, tentative kiss, and in that moment, the world seemed to fall away. There was no Earth, no Serenara, only the two of them, connected by something that transcended time and space, something deeper than any words or logic could explain. When they finally pulled away, their foreheads rested together, their breaths mingling in the quiet room. "I don't know what's going to happen," Ilera whispered, her voice barely audible, "but I want to find out, with you." Ethan smiled, his heart swelling with emotion. "We'll figure it out together." And in that moment, as they sat together in the fading light of the afternoon, surrounded by the holographic memories of another world, Ethan knew that their journey was just beginning. Whatever challenges lay ahead, whatever obstacles they would have to face, he didn't care. All that mattered was Ilera, and the love they had discovered in the most unexpected of places. It had been 3 months since Ethan and Ilera's quiet, intimate confession of love, and their relationship had deepened in ways Ethan had anticipated. Their bond, once tentative and cautious, had blossomed into something beautiful and profound. Every day they spent hours together exploring both their worlds, sharing stories, dreams, and fears. Ilera introduced Ethan to alien technologies, philosophies, and art from her home planet, and Ethan, in turn, showed her the little wonders of Earth, that she had yet to discover his favorite diner where they could sit and talk for hours, the beach at sunset. The quiet streets of the nearby city, where they would walk hand in hand, under the cover of darkness, away from prying eyes. But as their connection grew stronger, so did the weight of the outside world pressing in on them. It started with whispers. At first there were subtle neighbors who glanced too long at Ilara's house as they passed by, murmured conversations that abruptly stopped whenever Ethan entered a room. The small, close-knit community that had once ignored Ilara's presence was starting to take notice, and not in a good way. Ethan had always known that their relationship would be met with skepticism, even fear. After all, Ilara wasn't just different, she was alien, and the idea of a human being involved with someone from another world was bound to stir up strong emotions. But he hadn't anticipated just how quickly the whispers would turn into something darker. One afternoon, as Ethan returned from the grocery store, he saw a group of neighbors gathered at the end of his driveway. They weren't doing anything overtly aggressive, just standing there, talking in low voices, but the tension in the air was palpable. Their eyes followed him as he pulled into the driveway, and when he stepped out of the car, they didn't look away. A middle-aged man named Frank, someone Ethan had barely spoken to in the past, gave him a tight-lipped smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Afternoon, Ethan," he said, his voice carrying an edge that set Ethan on alert. "Afternoon," Ethan replied cautiously, closing the car door and grabbing his grocery bags. He glanced at the other neighbors, an older woman named Martha, her brow furrowed in disapproval, and a couple he didn't know well, their expressions unreadable but tense. Frank took a step closer, his hands shoved into the pockets of his jacket. "Heard you've been spending a lot of time with the new girl next door," he said, his tone casual, but there was something in his eyes that made Ethan's stomach churn. "Ilara, isn't it?" Ethan felt his pulse quicken, a cold prickle of unease creeping down his spine. "Yeah, that's right," he said evenly. "We've gotten to know each other." Frank raised an eyebrow, his smile widening just a fraction. "She's different, huh?" Ethan's grip tightened on the grocery bags. He knew what Frank was getting at, even if he wasn't saying it outright. The way he said different was filled with suspicion, with thinly veiled disdain. "I don't see how that's any of your business," Ethan said, trying to keep his voice steady, though the rising tension in his chest made it difficult. Frank's smile disappeared, replaced by a frown. "People talk," Ethan, he said, his voice lowering. "They're saying she's not normal, that there's something off about her. I mean, we all saw the lights coming from her house, the weird noises. Some folks are worried." Ethan felt a flash of anger, but he held it back, forcing himself to stay calm. He wasn't about to let these people intimidate him, but he also knew that getting defensive wouldn't help. "Ilara is just trying to live her life, same as anyone else," he said firmly. "She's not hurting anyone." Martha, the older woman, chimed in, her voice sharp. "That's not the point, Ethan. We don't know what she is or where she came from. People are scared. You can't blame them for wanting to protect themselves." Ethan's jaw clenched. Protect themselves from what? From someone who's done nothing wrong. She's not a threat. "She's not human," Frank said bluntly, his words heavy with meaning. "And you're getting involved with her. That worries people." Ethan's heart pounded in his chest, anger bubbling up to the surface. "This is ridiculous," he snapped. "Ilara is more human than half the people I've met. She's kind, she's compassionate, and she's done nothing to deserve this kind of suspicion. You don't know her, and you have no right to judge her just because she's different." Frank's expression hardened. "Maybe you don't see it, Ethan, but we do. There's something off about her, and we're just looking out for our community. You should be careful. You don't know what you're getting into." Ethan wanted to shout at them, to tell them all to leave, but he knew that wouldn't solve anything. Instead, he forced himself to take a deep breath, his hands shaking slightly as he tightened his grip on the grocery bags. "I appreciate your concern," he said through gritted teeth, "but I can take care of myself. Now, if you'll excuse me, I've got things to do." Without waiting for a response, he turned and walked toward his house, his heart pounding in his chest. He could feel their eyes on him as he went inside, the tension in the air following him like a storm cloud. Once inside, he set the groceries down on the kitchen counter, his hands still trembling with anger and frustration. He knew this was only the beginning. The whispers were turning into something more, something dangerous. And he wasn't sure how to stop it. A soft knock at the door pulled him from his thoughts, and when he opened it, Ilara stood there, her face pale and her violet eyes wide with worry. "I heard them," she said quietly, her voice trembling slightly. "The neighbors. They're talking about me, aren't they?" Ethan's heart sank. He had hoped she hadn't noticed, but of course she had. Ilara was more perceptive than anyone he had ever known, and it wasn't like their neighbors were being subtle. "Yeah," he admitted, running a hand through his hair. "They're scared. They don't understand you, and people fear what they don't understand." Ilara stepped inside, her arms wrapped around herself protectively. "I knew this would happen eventually," she said, her voice filled with a quiet sadness. "I've tried so hard to blend in, to live quietly. But I don't belong here, Ethan. No matter how much I try, I'll always be an outsider." Ethan's chest tightened as he looked at her. She looked so vulnerable, so fragile, and it broke his heart to see her this way. He stepped closer, gently taking her hands in his. "You belong with me," he said softly. "I don't care what anyone else thinks. They don't know you like I do." She looked up at him, her eyes shimmering with unshed tears. "But it's not just them, Ethan. My people. They'll find out eventually. They'll come for me. And if they knew how close we've become, how I feel about you, it would be forbidden." Ethan's heart skipped a beat at her words, but he didn't let go of her hands. "I don't care about forbidden," he said firmly. "I care about you. And we'll figure this out together, no matter what." She stared at him for a long moment, as though trying to believe his words, trying to hold on to the hope he offered. But the doubt in her eyes was unmistakable. "I don't want to put you in danger," she whispered. "I don't want you to be hurt because of me." Ethan shook his head, his grip tightening on her hands. "You're not putting me in danger. We'll deal with whatever comes. I promise." But even as he said the words, he couldn't shake the sense of unease creeping into his mind. The neighbors were growing restless, and it was only a matter of time before things escalated. And then there was the looming shadow of Ilara's people, Cyberpunk, the distant planet she had once called home. What would happen if they found out about their relationship? What would they do to her or to him? Despite his determination, a cold knot of fear settled in Ethan's stomach. Over the next few days, the tension in the neighborhood only grew worse. Ethan noticed more people watching them, disapproving stares from passers-by, whispered conversations that stopped the moment they entered a room. Ilara did her best to stay out of sight, but it didn't seem to matter. The more reclusive she became, the more the rumors spread. One evening, as they sat together in Ethan's living room, the weight of it all finally came crashing down. The lights in the room were dim, casting long shadows on the walls, and the air was heavy with unspoken fears. Ilara sat on the edge of the couch, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, her expression distant. "I can't keep doing this," she said, suddenly, her voice breaking the silence. "I can't keep hiding, pretending that everything is normal when it's not. People are afraid of me. They don't want me here." Ethan looked at her, his heart aching at the defeat in her voice. "Ilara, don't say that. We'll get through this." She shook her head, her silver hair falling into her face. "No, we won't. They'll come for me, my people. They'll take me back, and I don't know what they'll do to you. I've already stayed longer than I should have." Ethan's stomach dropped. He had always known this moment would come, the moment when Ilara would have to choose between staying on Earth and returning to Cyberpunk. But he wasn't ready for it. He wasn't ready for it. He wasn't ready to lose her. "I won't let them take you," he said, his voice shaking with emotion. "I'll fight for you. We'll run if we have to." Tears welled up in Ilara's eyes, and she looked at him with a mixture of love and sorrow. "Ethan, you can't run from this. I'm not just some visitor from another country. I'm from another planet. My people have power beyond anything you can imagine. If they want me back, they'll find me. And they'll find you." Ethan's breath caught in his throat. He knew she was right, but he couldn't accept it. He couldn't accept losing her. "Ilara, his voice cracked, the words failing him. But before he could finish, the room was suddenly bathed in a strange, pulsating light. Ethan's heart leaped into his throat as he turned toward the source. It was the communication device, the small spherical object that had sat dormant for weeks. It was active again. Ilara's eyes widened in fear as she stood, her gaze fixed on the device. "They found me," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Ethan stood too, his mind racing. What do we do? Ilara didn't answer. Her eyes were locked on the glowing device, her expression a mixture of resignation and dread. For the first time since he had met her, Ethan saw real fear in her eyes. And in that moment, he knew. Their time was running out. That night, as they lay in bed together, the pulsating light of the communication device casting a faint glow across the room, Ethan held Ilara close, his arms wrapped around her, as though he could somehow shield her from the storm that was coming. "I don't want to lose you," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. Ilara didn't respond immediately. She simply rested her head against his chest, her breathing steady but shallow. After a long silence, she finally spoke, her voice soft and fragile. "You won't," she said. "No matter what happens, Ethan, you'll always have a part of me, even if I have to leave." Ethan tightened his grip on her, his heart breaking at the thought. "I don't want a part of you, I want all of you." Ilara's tears soaked into his shirt as she buried her face against him, and in that moment, Ethan realized just how much they had to lose. Their love had grown into something powerful, something real. But it was fragile too, and the forces that stood against them, both human and alien, were closing in. He didn't know what the future held. He didn't know if they could outrun the inevitable, or if their love would be strong enough to survive what was coming. But one thing was certain. Their lives, their love, would never be the same again. The night was still, heavy with an unspoken tension that lingered in the air like an invisible fog. Ethan lay awake in the darkness, his arm draped protectively over Ilara's waist. She was asleep beside him, her breathing steady but shallow, her body curled close to his, as if she were seeking comfort in his warmth. Yet even in sleep, he could feel the weight of her unease. It was as though she knew, even in her dreams, that their time together was slipping away. Ethan stared up at the ceiling, his mind racing. The pulsating light from Ilara's communication device, the one that had been silent for weeks, glowed faintly from across the room, casting eerie, shifting shadows on the walls. It was a reminder of the inevitable, a silent beacon calling Ilara back to the life she had left behind. Her people had found her, and with that discovery came a choice she could no longer avoid. He turned his head slightly, watching as the soft light illuminated her lavender skin, her silver hair shimmering faintly in the glow. She was otherworldly in every sense of the word, yet in the months since they had met, she had become his entire world. He couldn't imagine his life without her now, couldn't fathom waking up each morning without her by his side. And yet, the fear of losing her was ever present, gnawing at the edges of his thoughts. It had been days since the communication device had reactivated, signaling that her people were reaching out, urging her to return to Serenara. They hadn't spoken of it openly, there was no need to. The quiet understanding between them, the unspoken fears, hung over every conversation, every shared glance. Ethan had tried to pretend that everything was normal, that they could continue living in their little bubble of happiness, but the truth was undeniable. The time for decisions was approaching. As if sensing his troubled thoughts, Ilara stirred beside him, her eyes fluttering open. For a moment she lay still, her gaze drifting up to meet his. Her violet eyes, normally so full of warmth and curiosity, were clouded with uncertainty. Ethan could see the conflict swirling within them, the pull between her love for him and her duty to her people. "Ethan," she whispered, her voice barely audible in the stillness of the night. "I can't sleep." He sighed softly, brushing a strand of silver hair from her face. "I know," he said quietly, "neither can I." She turned on her side to face him, her hand resting gently on his chest. There was a heaviness in her eyes, a sorrow that made his heart ache. "They'll be coming for me soon," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "I can feel it." Ethan's stomach twisted at her words, but he forced himself to stay calm. "Ilara, we don't have to let them take you. We could leave, go somewhere else, somewhere they wouldn't find us." She closed her eyes, a tear slipping down her cheek. "You know that's not possible," she said softly. "They have technology beyond anything this world can imagine. If they want to find me, they will." Ethan clenched his jaw, a wave of helplessness washing over him. He had known this moment was coming, but it didn't make it any easier to accept. The idea of losing her, of watching her leave, was unbearable. "I don't want to lose you," he whispered, his voice cracking with emotion. Ilara opened her eyes, looking at him with a depth of love and sorrow that nearly broke him. "I don't want to leave you," she said, her voice thick with tears, But if I stay, I'm putting you in danger. I can't do that, Ethan. I can't be the reason you're hurt. He reached for her hand, lacing his fingers with hers. You're not putting me in danger, he said, his voice firm. We can face whatever comes together. I don't care what your people think. I love you, Ilara. I don't want to lose you. Ilara's breath hitched, and for a moment she said nothing. The silence between them was heavy, filled with unspoken fears and desperate hopes. Finally, she leaned in, resting her forehead against his. Her voice was barely a whisper when she spoke. I love you too, she said, more than I ever thought possible, but love isn't enough to protect us from what's coming. Ethan closed his eyes, his chest tightening as the reality of their situation crashed down on him. He wanted to fight for her, to find some way to keep her here with him, but he knew she was right. Her people were powerful, and if they wanted to bring her back, there was little he could do to stop them. The weight of that truth was crushing. For a long moment, they lay there in silence, their foreheads pressed together, their breaths mingling in the darkness. Ethan wished he could freeze this moment, hold on to it forever, but time was slipping away, and they both knew it. Eventually, Ilara pulled back, her eyes filled with resolve. There's something I need to show you, she said, her voice steady but laced with sorrow. Ethan frowned, confused. What do you mean? She stood up from the bed, her silver hair cascading down her back like a waterfall, and moved toward the corner of the room where her communication device sat. She picked it up gently, cradling it in her hands as though it were something precious. Then she turned back to him, her expression unreadable. This device, she began, her voice soft, it's more than just a means of communication. It's a portal, a gateway between worlds. Ethan sat up, his heart pounding in his chest. A portal. Ilara nodded. My people use it to travel between dimensions. It's how I came to Earth, how I've been able to stay here for so long without detection. But now that they've found me, the portal has been reactivated. I can use it to leave, to return to Surinara. Ethan felt his throat tighten. You mean, you could leave right now? She nodded again, her eyes filled with sorrow. Yes, but I don't want to leave you, Ethan. I want to find a way for us to be together. Ethan's mind raced as he processed her words. A portal. A gateway between worlds. It sounded like something out of a science fiction novel, but he knew Ilara wouldn't lie to him. The weight of her words settled heavily on his chest, and he realized just how monumental this decision was. What are you saying, Ilara? He asked quietly, his voice trembling. That you want me to come with you? She took a step closer, her violet eyes locking onto his with a fierce intensity. Yes, she said, her voice steady but filled with emotion. I want you to come with me, Ethan. To Surinara. We could start a new life there together. Away from the judgment, the fear. The danger. My people may not understand at first, but if we show them what we've found, what we've built together, maybe they'll see. Maybe they'll accept us. Ethan's heart pounded in his chest, a whirlwind of emotions crashing over him. He had never considered the possibility of leaving Earth, of leaving everything he had ever known behind. But the idea of living without Ilara was far more terrifying than the thought of stepping through a portal into the unknown. He stood slowly, his mind racing. Ilara, I don't know if I can just leave. My life is here, my work, my friends. And me, she interrupted gently, stepping closer until she was standing directly in front of him. She reached up, cupping his face in her hands. I know this is a lot to ask, Ethan, I know it's terrifying. But if we stay here, I'll be taken away from you, we'll be separated. But if you come with me, we can be together. We can face the unknown together. He stared into her eyes, feeling the weight of her words. She was asking him to make an impossible choice, stay in the only world he had ever known, or step into a new one, leaving everything behind. But as he looked into her eyes, he realized something. Watching the woman. Ilara was his world now. Everything else, his work, his friends, his quiet, isolated life, it all paled in comparison to the love he had found with her. She had shown him a universe beyond anything he could have imagined, and now she was offering him the chance to explore it with her. It was terrifying. But it was also exhilarating. I'll come with you, he whispered, his voice trembling with the enormity of the decision. Ilara's eyes filled with tears, and she pulled him into a tight embrace, her body trembling against his. Thank you, she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. Thank you for trusting me. Ethan held her close, his heart racing. He didn't know what the future held, didn't know what they would face on Serenara, or whether they would ever be accepted. But in that moment, none of that mattered. All that mattered was the woman in his arms, the love they shared, and the promise of a future together no matter where it took them. The next morning, as the sun rose over the horizon, casting the sky in hues of gold and pink, Ethan and Ilara stood in the living room, the communication device glowing softly between them. The portal had been activated, a swirling vortex of light and energy hovering in the air, shimmering with the colors of another world. Ethan's heart raced as he stood on the precipice of the unknown, his hand tightly gripping Ilara's. He glanced at her, and she smiled at him, her eyes filled with a mixture of excitement and nervousness. "Are you ready?" she asked softly, her voice trembling with emotion. He nodded, squeezing her hand. "As long as I'm with you." With a final glance around the room, the last vestige of his life on Earth, Ethan took a deep breath and stepped forward, hand in hand with Ilara, into the swirling portal. The world dissolved around them, and for a moment there was nothing but light and sensation, an overwhelming rush of energy, like being pulled through the fabric of reality itself. And then, suddenly, they were standing in a new world. Serenara. Ethan blinked, his eyes adjusting to the strange, ethereal light that bathed the landscape around them. It was breathtaking, more beautiful than anything he had seen in the holograms. The sky was a deep violet, shimmering with bands of light that stretched across the horizon. Towering crystalline trees swayed gently in the breeze, their leaves sparkling like diamonds. In the distance he could see the floating cities Ilara had described, their sleek, organic structures glistening in the alien light. Ilara squeezed his hand, her eyes bright with emotion as she looked at him. "Welcome to Serenara," she whispered. Ethan smiled, his heart swelling with love and wonder. "I can't believe we're really here." But before they could take another step, a figure emerged from the trees, tall, graceful, and undeniably alien. It was one of Ilara's people, their lavender skin glowing softly in the light, their silver hair flowing like liquid metal. The figure stepped forward, their expression unreadable as they looked at Ilara, then at Ethan. For a long moment there was silence. And then they spoke. "Ilara," the figure said, their voice calm but filled with authority. "You have returned." Ilara took a deep breath, her hand still tightly gripping Ethan's. "Yes," she said, her voice steady. "And I'm not alone." The figure's gaze shifted to Ethan, their eyes narrowing slightly. "A human," they said, their tone neutral but filled with curiosity. "You have brought a human to Serenara." "Yes," Ilara said firmly. "He is my partner, my equal. We are together." The figure studied them for a long moment, their expression unreadable. Ethan's heart raced as he stood there, feeling the weight of their scrutiny. He could sense the power radiating from them, the sheer authority they held over Ilara and her people. But then, something unexpected happened. The figure's expression softened and they nodded slowly. "Very well," they said, their voice calm. "If this is your choice, Ilara, we will honor it. But know this, our world is not the same as Earth. The path you have chosen will not be easy." Ilara lifted her chin, her gaze unwavering. "I understand. But I am willing to fight for what we have." The figure regarded them for a moment longer, then stepped aside, gesturing toward the distant city. "Then welcome home." Ethan's heart soared as he looked at Ilara, a smile spreading across his face. She smiled back, her eyes filled with love and determination. Together they stepped forward into the unknown, hand in hand, ready to face whatever challenges awaited them. For they had learned that love, true love, could transcend the boundaries of time, space, and even worlds. And now their journey was just beginning. It had been nearly a year since Ethan and Ilara had stepped through the portal into Serenara, her homeworld, a place of ethereal beauty that still left Ethan breathless every time he looked out over its crystalline landscapes. The transition had not been easy. They had faced challenges from Ilara's people, adjusting to a culture that, while rich and harmonious, still held onto ancient customs that made their relationship seem unnatural to many. Yet, despite the difficulties, Ethan and Ilara had grown even closer. Their bond, tested by the unfamiliar, had solidified into something unbreakable. The city of Eldara, where they had settled, was a floating metropolis, suspended high above the ground by Cyberpunk technology that Ethan still struggled to comprehend. It was a city of gleaming spires, shimmering gardens, and streets that seemed to hum with a quiet energy. Here, Ethan had begun to carve out a life for himself, slowly earning the respect of the Cyberpunks through his curiosity, humility, and love for Ilara. But today felt different. A new kind of tension buzzed in the air, not the apprehensive tension of the past, but something more personal, more profound. Ethan stood in the center of a serene garden high in Eldara, waiting for Ilara to arrive. The garden was one of her favorite places, filled with plants that shimmered like stardust and flowers that sang softly in the breeze. It was where they had spent countless hours talking about their worlds, their dreams, and their love. He fidgeted nervously with a small object in his hand, something he had carried for days, but hadn't yet found the courage to present. In the glowing light of Cyberpunk's twin moons, he could see the metallic band glinting softly. It wasn't an earthly ring, of course. Ilara had no concept of the human tradition of engagement, but Ethan had spent months creating something that would honor both their worlds. The band was made from a rare Cyberpunk metal called Aetherium, interwoven with fragments of meteorite Ethan had gathered on his long walks across the planet's surface. It was a symbol of their journey, two worlds, two souls, united in a way that defied the stars themselves. He took a deep breath, steadying his nerves as he heard her approaching footsteps. His heart raced with both excitement and fear. What if she didn't understand? What if this kind of commitment was too much for her, given the complexities of her life and the expectations of her people? Before he could spiral too deeply into his own thoughts, Ilara appeared at the entrance of the garden, her luminous lavender skin glowing in the moonlight. Her silver hair flowed freely down her back, catching the faint light and giving her an ethereal, otherworldly beauty. She smiled when she saw him, her violet eyes filled with the warmth and love that had become his anchor in this strange, breathtaking world. Ethan, she greeted softly, her voice like music in the quiet of the night. You wanted to meet here. He nodded, his throat suddenly dry. Yeah, I wanted to talk to you about something. Ilara stepped closer, her expression turning curious. You seem nervous, she observed, her head tilting slightly in that endearing way she had when she was trying to understand something unfamiliar. Ethan laughed softly, running a hand through his hair. I guess I am, he admitted, but it's a good kind of nervous. She stepped even closer, her hand finding his, the cool touch of her fingers immediately calming his racing heart. You don't have to be nervous with me, she said softly. You know that. Ethan smiled, his nerves easing just slightly. She was right, of course. In all the months they had spent together, Ilara had always made him feel understood, safe, and deeply loved, despite the complexities of their relationship. I know, he said, squeezing her hand, but this is different. Ilara raised an eyebrow, her curiosity deepening. Different how? Ethan took a deep breath, then gently pulled her toward a small bench that overlooked the sparkling garden. They sat together, and for a moment he just looked at her, marveling at how deeply he had fallen in love with this woman from another world. She had changed his life in ways he could never have imagined, opened his eyes to the vastness of the universe, made him question everything he thought he knew about love and connection. And now he wanted to take the next step in their journey together. Ilara, he began, his voice steady but filled with emotion. When I first met you, I had no idea how much my life was about to change. You came into my world, and you didn't just open my eyes to new possibilities, you opened my heart. I never thought I could love someone the way I love you. It's like, you've become a part of me. In a way that's hard to explain. Ilara's expression softened, her violet eyes shimmering with unshed tears. Ethan, she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. He smiled, his heart pounding in his chest. I know that where you come from, relationships aren't always the same as they are on Earth. But in my world, when two people love each other, when they know they want to spend the rest of their lives together, we have a tradition. We call it marriage. It's a promise, a commitment to love and care for each other, no matter what. And I want that with you. Ilara's eyes widened, a soft gasp escaping her lips as she realized what he was saying. You want to marry me. Ethan nodded, his hands trembling slightly as he reached into his pocket and pulled out the ring. The delicate band of Aetherium glinted in the moonlight, its intricate design a perfect blend of earthly and Cyberpunk craftsmanship. I know this isn't a tradition where you're from, he said softly, holding the ring between them. But to me, this is a symbol of everything we've been through. It's a promise. I want to spend the rest of my life with you, Alara. No matter what challenges we face, no matter what comes next, I want to face it with you. For a moment, Ilara said nothing. She simply stared at the ring, her eyes wide with wonder, her expression filled with awe. Ethan's heart raced as he waited for her response, his breath catching in his throat. He had never been more vulnerable, more open, than he was in this moment. Then, slowly, Ilara reached out and took the ring in her hands, her fingers brushing against his. Tears welled up in her eyes as she looked at him, her voice trembling with emotion. Ethan, she whispered, her voice filled with love. I don't have the words. Your world. Your traditions are so different from mine, but the way you love me, the way you've always made me feel, I want that too. I want everything with you. Ethan felt a surge of relief and joy wash over him, his heart swelling with love for the woman in front of him. Does that mean? Ilara smiled, tears streaming down her cheeks as she nodded. Yes, Ethan. I will marry you. I will spend my life with you. In that moment, Ethan's heart soared. He slipped the ring onto her finger, and they both stared at it for a moment, marveling at the beauty of the promise it represented. Then, without another word, he leaned in and kissed her, the world around them dissolving into nothing but the two of them, two souls from different worlds, united by love. The day of their wedding was unlike anything Ethan had ever experienced. Cyrenara had no concept of human marriage ceremonies, but Alara had worked with him to blend their worlds in a way that honored both their traditions. They were married in the heart of Eldara, beneath the glowing trees and the shimmering skies, surrounded by the serene beauty of Cyrenara. The ceremony was simple yet profound. Ilara wore a gown made from a delicate, iridescent fabric that shimmered with every movement, its colors shifting with the light. Ethan, dressed in a traditional Cyrenaran robe, stood by her side, his heart racing as he looked at the woman who had become his entire world. They exchanged vows, not in the traditional human sense, but in a way that felt deeply personal and true to them. Ilara spoke of the stars, of the vastness of the universe, and how, despite the infinite distance between their worlds, they had found each other. Ethan, in turn, spoke of love, of how it transcended time, space, and even species. As they stood together, hand in hand, beneath the glowing trees of Cyrenara, Ethan felt a sense of peace wash over him. This moment, this commitment, was more than just a union of two people. It was a union of two worlds, two lives that had once been separated by galaxies, but were now forever intertwined. The ceremony ended with a Cyrenaran blessing, a soft, melodic chant that echoed through the air, and as they turned to face the small gathering of friends and supporters who had come to witness their union, Ethan felt a wave of love and acceptance wash over him. Ilara's people, once hesitant and wary of their relationship, had begun to see the strength of their bond. Over time, they had come to understand that love, no matter how unconventional, was something to be celebrated, not feared. As the evening faded into night, Ethan and Ilara stood together, watching the twin moons rise over the horizon, casting their soft light over the floating city. In that moment, Ethan knew, with absolute certainty, that they had made the right choice, that, no matter what challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. He turned to Ilara, his heart full of love and gratitude. Ilara, he whispered, pulling her close. I promise I will love you for the rest of my life, no matter what. She smiled, her eyes shimmering with tears. And I will love you for all of mine, she replied softly. Across worlds, across time we are one. And as the night stretched on, as they stood together beneath the stars, Ethan knew that their love, like the universe itself, was infinite, boundless, and eternal. Together, they had transcended worlds. Together, they had found a love that could never be broken,